Listen, K-Fam. The music box on the workbench was still playing when the door came down. Celeste Davenport is 28. Black, all-quiet grace, her braids tied back with dark velvet. She restores centuries-old instruments for a living. That night, her hands were inside an 18th-century cello when the men broke in. She smelled her brother's cologne too late. Marcus was already gone with a stolen fortune, and they told her the debt had a new name now, hers, Omo. They call her the living collateral. They drag her into a fortress of a mansion, marble, silence, cameras in every corner, and then him, Seo Do-jin, 36, the Korean mafia boss they call Snow Wolf. Nearly 2 meters of him, cold black eyes, a black wolf inked from his shoulder up the side of his neck, rising above the collar. He looks at her like a line in a ledger. He says her life belongs to the debt book now. Weeks pass behind locked doors, forced dinners at the same long table. She notices things, K-Fam. The dark circles, the coffee gone cold. Nobody ever sees this man sleep. And the housekeeper keeps looking away whenever anyone mentions the West Wing. Then the storm hits. The power dies, and something in that house starts to scream. I'm telling you right now, what she does in the dark that night changes everything. Before starting the story, comment down below where you are watching from and what time it is there. If stories of karma, love, and hidden truths move you, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a member and help our channel. The horsehair bow hovered a breath above the string, and Celeste Davenport held it there, unmoving, because the varnish underneath was 240 years old and did not forgive a shaking hand. She was not shaking. She never shook when she worked. The cello lay across her lap like a sleeping animal. Its belly split along an old crack she'd spent 3 nights coaxing back together, and the small lamp threw her shadow long across the bench. Rain outside. Fine. Rain was good for glue. She pressed the clamp a half-turn tighter and listened to the wood settle. 2 in the morning, maybe later. The workshop smelled of hide glue and cedar, and the ghost of coffee gone cold in the mug by her elbow. She'd told herself 1 more hour 4 hours ago. The instrument was worth more than the building it sat in, more than the block the building sat on, and the collector who owned it wanted it back Friday, whole, singing. Celeste's fingers knew the seam better than her eyes did. She ran a thumb along the rib and felt the join hold. Then the front door came off its hinges. Not opened. Not knocked. The whole frame jumped, and the deadbolt tore through the strike plate, and the door swung in on one screaming hinge, and slammed the wall so hard the tools jumped on their pegs. Celeste's body moved before her mind did. She twisted, curling the cello into her chest, spine hunched over it, both arms around the belly of the thing like it was a child she was pulling out of traffic. Boots. 3 sets. 4. Wet on the concrete. Davenport. Not a question. A man said her name the way you read it off a list, and she felt every hair on her arms lift. She didn't look up right away. She was still bent over the cello, and part of her, the part that had spent her whole life around things that break, was doing the math on how to set it down without a scratch, while men she couldn't see filled her shop. She lowered it, slow, onto the padded cradle. Her hands were steady, her heart was not, and the 2 facts had nothing to do with each other. When she straightened, there were 4 of them, black tactical, no logos, faces she'd never seen. The one in front had a jaw like a shovel and a coil of wire in his gloved fist, and behind him, the others fanned into the small room and touched nothing and looked at everything. Professionals. She knew the look the way she knew a good bridge from a bad one. It was in how still they held. "You've got the wrong place," she said. Her voice came out level. She was proud of that later, when she had time to be proud of anything. "There's nothing here worth." Celeste Davenport, shovel jaw again, sister of Marcus, and the floor of her stomach dropped clean out. She'd been chasing that name for 11 days. 11 days of calls that rang into nothing, of a brother who'd stopped answering, of that easy laugh of his going quiet on the other end of the line for the first time in her life. She'd told herself he was busy. Marcus was always busy, always 3 deals deep, always the smartest man in a room he shouldn't have been in. She'd told herself a lot of things. "Where's your brother?" the man asked. "I don't know." It was true, and the truth sounded exactly like a lie, and she watched it land on him and change nothing. He stepped forward. His boot found the mug, kicked it aside, and cold coffee spread black across the floor toward her feet. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking past her, at the bench, and something in his face shifted. A flick of recognition, of interest, and Celeste turned to follow his eyes, and that was when she saw it. The music box was open. She hadn't opened it. She never left it open. It sat on the high shelf above her workbench, where the damp couldn't reach the mechanism, a small silver thing tarnished at the corners, its lid up, and its little comb bared to the lamplight. Her mother's. The last thing her mother's hands had touched that Celeste still had, and it was open, and it should not have been open, and the cold that went through her then had nothing to do with the rain. Someone had been in her shop before these men. Someone who knew what that box was. "Pretty," Shoveljaw said, following her stare. "He talked about that, your brother." Celeste's mouth went dry. "You've seen Marcus. We've been looking at your brother a long time." The man rolled the wire once around his knuckles and let it hang. "You want to know the truth? We've been looking at your whole family a long time. Just took him doing something stupid enough to make it worth the drive." "What did he do?" The man smiled, and it was worse than the wire. "He took something that wasn't his. Then he took a lot more of it. And then he did the smartest thing your brother's ever done in his life." A pause, savoring it. He ran. The word went through her like a splinter. Ran. Marcus ran. She thought of the calls going dark, the laugh going quiet. 11 days of telling herself he was busy while he was, what, gone. Somewhere with a suitcase and a burner and that grin. Somewhere she couldn't reach, and these men in her shop at 2 in the morning were the reason. She saw it all at once, the whole shape of it, and her legs wanted to fold and she locked her knees and did not let them. "How much?" she said. "How much what? How much did he take?" The man tilted his head. You wouldn't be able to say the number without laughing, or crying. He looked at her the way a man looks at merchandise. "You didn't know." "No. He didn't tell you he was in it." "No. He didn't tell you whose money it was." "No." And here the man's amusement dimmed, and what came into his face instead was almost, not kindness, nothing like it, but a kind of professional pity, the pity of a man who's about to explain the rules to someone who's already lost. "That's your brother," he said. "That's exactly your brother. He didn't tell you a thing. He took the money and he left the box open so somebody would find it, so somebody would find it. And he got on a plane. The box, left open, so they'd find her. Something in Celeste's chest cracked along a seam she didn't know she had. She'd raised him. No, not raised. They'd raised each other, after their mother, 2 kids in a walk-up learning how to be adults on a schedule nobody gave them. Marcus had carried her home from the hospital when she broke her wrist at 9. Marcus had co-signed the lease on this shop when no bank in the city would look at her twice. Marcus, who never let her pay for dinner, who always had cash, who never once told her where the cash came from. And she had never asked. She'd never asked because asking would mean knowing, and knowing would mean she couldn't keep loving him the easy way. He left the box open, so they'd find her. "Get away from the bench," she said. The man raised an eyebrow. "That instrument is worth more than everything in this room, including you. If your people touch it, whoever sent you is going to have a very hard conversation about a very large number, and I promise you it won't be with me." She heard her own voice do something she didn't plan. Go flat, go professional, cold. And the man actually paused. Step away from the bench. For a second, nobody moved. The rain filled the silence. Then he laughed, short, through the nose, and lifted his hands and stepped back from the workbench with an exaggerated care that was its own kind of insult. She's got teeth, he said. To no one. To all of them. Good. He said she wouldn't. Said she was the soft one. He looked at her again, and now the amusement was gone for good. The soft one, who yells about the cello, while her brother sells her for parts. He didn't sell me. Baby. The word was almost gentle. Why do you think we're here? And there it was. The thing under the thing. She'd been circling it since the door came in, and now it sat in the middle of the room and looked back at her, and she made herself look at it straight. Say it, she said. The man crossed the small space. He didn't touch her. He stood close enough that she could smell the rain in his jacket and the gun oil under it, and he spoke low, the way you tell someone news at a funeral. Your brother owes a debt he can't ever pay. That debt doesn't go away because he got on a plane. Debts like this, they don't chase the man. He nodded once at the open music box, at the silver comb catching the light. They collect the collateral. I'm not collateral. You're the only Davenport left standing in a room we can reach. He straightened. So yeah, you are. The word for collateral did something strange to her. She'd expected fear. She was afraid. Her hands had gone cold and her pulse was a fist in her throat. But underneath the fear was a thing colder and clearer. The same thing that had made her tell a man with wire in his hand to step away from a cello. She was a person who fixed things. She'd built a life out of the discipline of it, out of steady hands and slow work, and the refusal to panic when something valuable was coming apart in her lap. And right now the something valuable coming apart was her. She reached, slow, hands visible, past the man to the shelf, and she closed the music box. The lid came down with a small silver click. The men tensed at the motion, and eased when they saw what it was, and Shoveljaw watched her fingers rest on the closed lid and said nothing. If I'm going somewhere, Celeste said, this comes with me. That's not how. It comes with me, or you can explain to whoever sent you why the collateral had to be dragged out by the hair. You want me quiet? You want me walking on my own feet? This comes with me. She lifted the box off the shelf and held it against her chest with both hands, the way she'd held the cello, and she looked at him over the top of it. Those are my terms. I don't have a lot of them. Honor this one. Something moved behind the man's eyes. Calculation. He touched 2 fingers to the device in his ear, said a few words in Korean, too low and too fast for her to catch, and listened. Then he looked at her differently, recalibrating. Whoever was on the other end of that earpiece had said something about her, and she'd never know what, and it changed the temperature in the room by a degree she could feel. Fine, he said. The box comes, and the cello stays, untouched. It goes back to its owner Friday. You do not let it sit in the damp. You do not let your people breathe on it. Somebody in your operation knows what a climate-controlled case is. You put it in one, and you courier it to the address in that folder. She nodded at the manila folder on the corner of the bench. Do that, and I walk out of here without a sound. You're negotiating. I'm the only one in this room who knows how not to destroy a $200,000 object. You're going to want that skill again. She held his eyes. Trust me. And it landed. She watched it land. Watched the man file her away as something other than what he'd walked in expecting. Something with a use. Something worth keeping intact. And later she would understand that this was the first mistake and the first mercy. That in bargaining for her own careful survival, she had shown him exactly the thing that would make her worth more alive than dead. She didn't know that yet. She only knew the box was against her chest and her hands were steady, and she was still, somehow, on her feet. The perfume reached her a second before she understood it. Faint, under the gun oil and the rain and the glue, a warm woody smell, cedar and something darker, a cologne she'd have known anywhere because she'd bought it for him, 3 Christmases running, Marcus's scent, hanging in the air of her own workshop, near the shelf, near the box. He'd been here. Not a stranger who knew what the box was. Him, Marcus. He'd stood in her shop, at her bench, in front of her mother's music box, and he'd opened the lid with his own hands so that these men would find it, find her, and he'd walked out into the rain, and gotten on a plane, and he had not woken her, had not warned her, had not left a note. He'd left the box open. He'd left her open. The realization came late, hours late, a whole night of not answered calls late, and it arrived all at once, the way the worst understandings do, and Celeste stood very still and let it move through her, and did not let a single thing show on her face. One of the other men had drifted to the far wall. He was reading her tools now, the little rack of gouges and knives she kept honed to a hair, and he lifted one, a purfling cutter, thin as a needle, and turned it in the light like he was pricing it. "Put that down," she said. He looked at Shoveljaw. Shoveljaw made a small motion with 2 fingers, and the man set it back in its slot. Not because she'd asked, because someone had decided, somewhere up the chain, that the merchandise talked, and the merchandise was to be indulged, at least tonight, at least this far. That was the part that reached into her and turned. Not the wire, not the broken door. The ease of it. These men had done this before, walked into some other room, said some other name, put some other person in a car, and the routine of it sat on them like a uniform. She was the exception in the room only to herself. "He has a daughter," she heard herself say. Shoveljaw blinked. "Who?" "Marcus. He has—" She stopped. He didn't. She didn't know why she'd said it, except that she was reaching for anything, any thread that might make the men on the other end of that earpiece see a person instead of a line item, and the lie had come up out of the cold water of her fear before she could look at it. Never mind. "He doesn't have a daughter," the man said, flat, certain. "He has a sister who fixes violins, and a dead mother, and a father nobody's seen since '99. He tipped his head. "We know your family better than you do. That's what the money buys." The intimacy of it was obscene. A stranger reciting the shape of her life back to her in a wrecked doorway at 2 a.m, and every word of it true. Celeste's arms tightened around the box. "You don't know me," she said. "No," he agreed, almost pleasant, "but somebody's going to." She let that sit. She didn't ask who. Some questions you don't ask, because the asking gives the other person the pleasure of not answering, and she'd be damned if she'd hand this man one more pleasure tonight. Instead, she looked, one more time, slow, around the shop, because she understood, the way you understand weather changing, that she might not see it again. The pegboard, the jars of amber varnish lined by year, the photograph tacked over the bench, her mother laughing at something outside the frame, the only picture Celeste had, where the woman looked young. And under the photograph, the clean ring in the dust where the box had lived. She'd dusted around it for 6 years and never once moved it. Marcus had moved it. Marcus's hands, that woody smell still hanging where his hands had been. She breathed through it. In through the nose, the way she breathed when the glue was setting, and a single tremor would ruin a week's work. Steady, steady. The thing in her lap was the last of her mother, and the first of whatever came next, and it would not help her mother, or herself, to come apart in front of men who were counting on it. "We're leaving," Shoveljaw said. She looked one last time at the workbench, at the cello in its cradle, split belly mended, waiting to sing for someone who wasn't her, at the cold coffee spreading toward the drain, at the shelf where the box had sat, empty now, a clean circle in the dust, Then she looked at the men. 4 of them. A ruined door. A city asleep and full of rain outside, and no one in it who knew where she was, or would know by morning. "Where?" she said. "You'll see it when you see it." The man stepped aside and gestured her toward the broken doorway with something that was almost courtesy. "Long drive." She adjusted her grip on the music box, silver cold against her palms, her mother's tune locked silent inside the comb. She pulled the silver pendant at her throat, back under the collar of her plum sweater, without thinking about it. A small private motion, the treble clef disappearing against her skin. Then she walked, past the wire, past the fanned-out men who tracked her with their eyes and touched nothing, past the bench, the lamp, the sleeping cello, out through the door her brother's debt had kicked off its hinges, into the rain, toward a car with tinted glass idling at the curb, with its back door already open like a mouth. The man held the door. She got in. The box rode in her lap. And as the door thunked shut, and the locks dropped, and the car pulled away from the only life she'd built with her own 2 hands, Celeste Davenport pressed both palms flat against the cold silver lid and stared out at the streaming glass and understood, with the clean, terrible clarity of someone who has just watched a beloved thing come apart in her lap, that she was no longer a person who fixed things. She was the thing that had been left behind to be collected. The car turned north, the city thinned, the rain kept coming. And somewhere ahead of her in the dark, past a gate she couldn't see yet, and a wall she didn't know was there, a man she'd never met was already awake, and had already heard her name, and was waiting. The gate came out of nowhere. 1 second the road was black pine on both sides, headlights eating asphalt, rain smearing the glass. Then the trees pulled back and there it was, a wall, not a fence, a wall, tall, wet, stone the color of a bruise, running left into the dark and right into the dark, and giving no hint of where it stopped. 2 lamps burned at the gate. The car slowed, and Celeste felt the tires go from road to something smoother, quieter, expensive. She pressed the music box tighter to her chest. Nobody had spoken to her in 40 minutes. The men up front traded 3 words in Korean, low, and the gate rolled sideways on a track without a single squeal. Money oiled everything here. Even the hinges kept quiet. The drive curved. Trees again, then a fountain, dry, and then the house. It was not a house. It was a position. Long, low-shouldered, 3 floors of stone and glass built into the slope like it grew there. Windows dark except for a handful burning gold on the ground floor. Cameras on the corners, small red eyes. A man stood at the top of the steps under the overhang, out of the rain, hands folded in front of him, waiting with the stillness of someone who had waited 1,000 times and never once been surprised. The car stopped. The locks came up. Celeste did not move first. She counted her own breath. In for 4, hold, out for 4, the thing she did before a scalpel touched varnish, and only then reached for the handle. The door opened from outside before her fingers found it. Rain hit her wrist. A hand, gloved, black leather, held the frame. Ms. Davenport. The man on the steps had come down. Up close he was shorter than the others, wider, solid as a safe, hair shaved gray at the temples, a thin scar riding the line of his jaw. His voice had no edge in it, which was somehow worse than a threat. "This way. Mind the steps, they're slick." She stepped out into the weather. The music box went under the cardigan, pressed to her ribs, and she followed him up. Inside, the rain shut off behind 2 heavy doors, and the world went warm and dim and enormous. Stone floors, honey-colored under low lamps. A ceiling she couldn't see the top of. Somewhere deep in the house a clock ticked, slow, brass, patient. The air smelled of cedar oil and cold coffee, and, under it, something medicinal she couldn't name. An older woman waited in the hall, gray hair in a coil so tight it looked painful, a linen apron over a charcoal dress, A ring of keys hung at her hip that whispered when she shifted her weight. Her eyes went to Celeste, then to the shape under the cardigan, then away. Fast. Trained. She said nothing. She dipped her head half an inch to the gray-templed man and stepped back against the wall like furniture. But her hands gave her away. They folded in front of the apron, and the thumb of the right worked the knuckle of the left. Once, twice. A small private grinding a person does when they've watched something like this happen before, and it didn't end clean. Celeste caught it in half a second. She caught it because her whole trade was reading the tiny betrayals of things that pretend to be steady, the hairline in a bridge, the sag no one else could see. This woman had opened this door for a frightened stranger more than once, and she was still frightened herself, in a way that living here for years should have burned off. The gray-templed man was already moving. Celeste went after him, and she felt the older woman's eyes land on her back and stay there until the hall bent and took her out of sight. Yoon-mi Ray runs the house, the man said, not slowing. You'll see her more than you see me. I'm Han. Keep up. He walked. Celeste kept up. They passed a staircase that split and climbed both directions, past doors, closed, past a corridor that ran off to the left, and Han's stride shifted, a fraction, a half-beat quicker, as they crossed its mouth, and his eyes did not turn down it. She clocked that. She filed it. Restorers noticed the seam that had been painted over, the crack somebody hoped you'd miss. The left corridor was a painted-over crack. "Where are we going?" she said. Not a question, exactly. She wanted her own voice back in her own mouth. "Dinner," Han said. "I'm not hungry." "That's fine." He is not either. The corridor they took ran deeper than any house had a right to. Doors on both sides, all shut, all the same dark wood, all fitted with locks that faced out into the hall instead of in. She counted them without meaning to. 7 on the left, 6 on the right, and a gap where the 7th should have been, the mouth of the left corridor, the painted-over crack, and Han's shoulders squared a half-inch as they passed it, his gaze fixed hard on the doors ahead, like a man walking past a dog he'd been bitten by. On the walls hung art. Real art, the kind with its own little brass light, ink paintings, mountains dissolving into fog, a crane, a river, a single pine bent by a wind you couldn't see, no family photos, no faces, a house that owned 200 rooms of proof it existed, and not one picture of anyone who'd lived in it. Celeste had grown up in 3 rooms full of her mother laughing on every wall. She understood, walking past all that expensive emptiness, that she'd been brought somewhere colder than money. They stopped at a set of double doors, dark wood, iron handles worn bright by hands. Han knocked once with a knuckle, didn't wait, and pushed them open. The dining room could have seated 30. It sat 2, a single long table down the middle of it, dark as a river at night, and at the far end one place set, one plate, one glass, one man's shape behind it, backlit by a low lamp so she saw the size of him before she saw the face. Wide. The shoulders came first. He was turned 3/4 away, forearm on the table, sleeve rolled, a phone face down under his hand, and he was looking at the black window like the window owed him an answer. "Sit her down," he said, in English, low, unhurried, roughened at the bottom like a road that hadn't been paved in years. Han pulled a chair, not at the far end, halfway down, across the width, so the whole length of the table lay between her and the man at its head. Celeste sat. She put the music box on the wood in front of her, both hands flat on its lid, and looked up the table at Seo Do-jin. He turned. The lamp caught him, pale, paler than the men who'd brought her, a sleepless kind of pale, gray under the eyes like thumbprints pressed into clay, jaw hard, nose straight, mouth that gave away nothing, and when he leaned forward into the light and reached for his glass, his collar shifted at the neck, and she saw it. Black ink, riding up out of the shirt on the left side of his throat, the tip of something. A line of pine, a curve that could have been a shoulder, an ear, an animal. It climbed toward his jaw and vanished under cloth. He caught her looking. He did not cover it. "You know why you're here," he said. "I know what your men told me." "Then you know." "They told me my brother stole from you." Her voice came out level. She was proud of it. "They told me he ran. They told me you cover a runner's debt by taking whatever's still standing in the room." She let a beat go by. "I'm what's still standing." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile, the memory of where a smile would go. 211, he said. "I'm sorry?" "Million." He turned the glass a quarter, watched the light bend in it. "Your brother, that's the number. People say it and they laugh or they cry. I've watched both." His eyes came up to her, flat black, heavy, and tired in a way that had nothing to do with tonight. "You're doing neither." "Good." Han had gone to stand by the doors, hands folded, a wall with a pulse. Somewhere behind a service door, there was the small clatter of a kitchen pretending the night was normal. A young woman came out of the service door with a tray, set a bowl down in front of the man at the head of the table, and left without lifting her eyes off the floor. Steam rose off the bowl. He didn't touch it. It sat there getting cold in front of him, the way, Celeste would come to learn, everything in this house got cold in front of him. "I can't pay you $211 million, Celeste said. "I know. I don't have 211,000. "I know that too." He set the glass down. "That's not what you're for." The word sat there, for, like she was a tool, with a use he hadn't decided yet. She kept her hands flat on the music box, kept her spine off the chair back, kept her chin where it was. "Then say what I'm for." He studied her a long moment. It was the look of a man reading a contract for the second time, hunting the clause that would cost him. Then he stood. He was very tall standing. He came down the side of the table, slow, one hand trailing the wood, and stopped 4 chairs from her, close enough that she could see the sleeplessness was not a night's worth. It was a life's worth. "Your brother made you a line item," Dojin said. "The day he signed my paper, he put everyone he'd ever loved into the collateral column, whether he told them or not. That's not my cruelty. That's arithmetic." He tipped his head toward the box under her hands. "You brought luggage. I brought one thing. What is it?" "A music box." She did not move her hands. "It was my mother's." His eyes went to it. Just a flick, and something passed behind his face. Quick, gone. A shutter opening and closing on a dark room, and then it was flat again, and she wondered if she'd invented it. "Does it play?" he said. "The mechanism's broken. It hasn't played in years." "Then it's not a music box. It's a silver box." He turned away, walked back up the length of the wood. "You'll be in the East Wing. Mireille has a room made up. You don't cook, you don't clean, you don't answer a door. You have exactly one job while you're a guest of this house, Ms. Davenport, and it's the same job my accountant has. You keep your value." He sat back down at the head of the table, picked the phone up, turned it in his fingers without looking at it. "Value that walks out a gate stops being value, you understand me." "There are people who pay their brother's debts," Celeste said, "with a body in a room. You could have had that tonight. Cheaper, cleaner. Instead, you drove me an hour north and made a bed. That's not arithmetic. That's a decision." She held his eyes. "So the number isn't why I'm alive. Say the real reason or don't, but don't sell me the math." For a moment, nothing in his face moved. Then his gaze went, again, to the box under her hands. Longer this time. He caught himself doing it and pulled it back to her, and there was something new in it now. Not warmth, nothing like warmth, but attention, sharp. The look of a man who'd just heard a note in a room he thought was soundproof. "You're saying I'm a prisoner." "I'm saying you're expensive." He set the phone down. There's a difference, and you'll learn it. He looked at Han. He said one thing in Korean, short, 3 syllables, and went back to the black window, as if the room had already emptied. Han crossed the floor. Miss Davenport. She stood. She took the box. She was halfway to the door when Dojin spoke again, not turning. His voice pitched low enough that it barely reached her. One more thing. She stopped. The house has a west wing. He said it to the window, left of the main stair, past the long gallery. You saw the corridor coming in. Han slowed down at it. He always slows down at it. He can't help himself. A pause. Rain ticking the glass. You don't go down it. Not in daylight. Not at night. Not if you hear something. Not if you hear someone. Whatever crosses that hall doesn't concern you, and the day it does, you'll wish it never had. Celeste stood with the cold silver against her ribs and looked at the back of his head. What's in it? She said. He turned then. Just his face, over the wide shoulder, and the lamp put the tattoo's edge back on his throat, that climbing black line. That, he said, is the one question in this house you don't get to ask. Han's glove touched her elbow. Not rough, final. She let herself be led. The corridor to the east wing was long and lamplit and lined with doors, and none of them were open, and Han walked her past every one without a word until they reached the last on the right. He opened it. A room, a real room, a bed, a chair, a window with the rain on it, a lamp already burning, warmer than she expected. Someone had turned the covers down. On the small table by the bed sat a glass of water, a folded towel, and a single key that did not, she would learn, fit her own door. Bathrooms through there, Han said. Mireille brings breakfast at 8. If you need her in the night, there's a button by the bed. He paused in the doorway, filling it. Don't press it to test whether it works. It works. And don't wander. The house has cameras where you'd expect, and cameras where you wouldn't. The West Wing, Celeste said. Something crossed his face, the same flinch he'd hidden crossing the corridor's mouth. Quicker now, less hidden. You heard him. I heard a man who doesn't sleep tell me not to notice the one part of his house he can't stop looking at. Han's jaw worked once. For a moment, she thought he might actually say something true. Then the wall came back down over his eyes, and he stepped back into the hall. 8 o'clock, he said. Get some rest, Ms. Davenport. You're going to be here a while. The door closed. The lock turned from the outside. A single heavy sound, brass and old and absolute, the same note as the clock down the hall. Celeste stood in the middle of the room and did not move for a long time. Then she crossed to the window. Locked, the catch painted over, 3 floors up, nothing below but wet stone and dark. She checked it anyway, because checking was what her hands knew how to do when the rest of her had nowhere to go. She checked the closet, empty hangers, a folded robe. She checked the bathroom, clean, cold, a mirror, no razor, no glass but the one by the bed. Somebody had gone through the room before her and taken out everything with an edge. The door across the hall opened once while she stood there. She heard it, and Mireille's voice came low through the wood, Korean, 2 soft words to someone, and a younger voice answered, and then the hall went quiet again. Celeste pressed her ear to her own door and heard the older woman's shoes go past, slow, pause outside her room a full 3 seconds, and move on. Not a guard's pause, something else. The pause of a person deciding whether to knock and knowing she couldn't. She sat on the end of the bed and put the music box on her knees. Her thumbs found the seam by memory. She opened the lid, the little steel comb inside, the pinned cylinder, the tiny arm that hadn't turned in 6 years, all of it silent and dull under the lamp. She'd carried it out of the only home she had and into this one, and it still couldn't make a sound. A silver box. He'd been right, and she hated that he'd been right, and she closed the lid before the hate could turn into the other thing crowding up behind it. Down the hall, the clock ticked. She thought about the collector's cello, 300 miles south in its padded cradle, its belly glued and drying, due back Friday, to a man who would never know what the night around it had held. She thought about the manila folder on her bench with his address in it. She had made them promise. A silver clasp, a courier, a climate case, small terms, one from armed men in her own doorway, the last thing she'd controlled before the tinted glass swallowed her. She lay back on top of the covers, with her shoes still on, and stared at a ceiling she couldn't see the top of. $211 million. 11 days of a phone going to voicemail. A gate that didn't squeal. A corridor a scarred man couldn't stop slowing down for. She turned the pieces the way she turned a cracked rib of spruce, feeling for where the grain wanted to break. For everything that man had told her tonight, the number, the arithmetic, the rules of the East Wing, the only thing she believed all the way down was the one thing he refused to name. A man who owned $211 million of somebody's ruin, who ran a house with cameras where you wouldn't expect them, who took the razors out of a guest room, did not build his single hard rule around a room that didn't matter. The West Wing mattered more than she did. She'd heard it in the flatness he used to say it. You keep your value, he'd told her, like she was money. But when he'd said don't go down that hall, his voice had gone somewhere else. Quiet, careful, the voice you use for a thing you can't afford to let anyone touch. Celeste closed her eyes. She didn't sleep. She listened. The house breathed around her. Pipes, wind, the settle of old stone. And once, very late, so faint she couldn't be sure she hadn't dreamed it, she thought she heard something come from the far side of the house. Not words, lower than words. A sound a body makes when it's somewhere no one can follow. Then the wind took it, and the rain came harder, and the brass lock in her door stayed exactly where it was. She lay in the dark of a stranger's house, 3 floors up, behind a door that only opened from the outside, holding a box that couldn't play, and understood, with the same cold clarity she used to see a fracture that hadn't finished spreading yet, that whatever her brother had signed her into, the debt was the smallest part of it. The largest part was down a hall she'd been forbidden to walk, and she already knew she was going to walk it. The lock turned from the outside at 7:58, 2 minutes early, and Celeste was already sitting up with her shoes on. Mireille stood in the gap with a tray she didn't bring in, coffee, a bowl of rice porridge, a small dish of something pickled and orange. She set it on the little table by the door and stepped back, hands folding into her apron, eyes going to the window, the lamp, the floor, anywhere the guest wasn't. Breakfast is at 8, Mireille said. Her English was careful, each word set down like a plate. You come to the small dining room, not the big one. That is for him. And if I don't come, you come. She said it flat, the way you tell a child the stove is hot. Then she was gone, and the shoes went down the hall, and Celeste ate every grain in the bowl because a body that didn't eat was a body that couldn't run, and somewhere under the porridge, she'd already decided she was going to run. That was the first morning. By the 4th, she had the shape of the days memorized. Lock at 7:58. Porridge she didn't want and finished anyway. Han's boots somewhere below at 9. The low churn of Korean through the floor. Phones, a printer. A woman she never fully saw pushing a cart with towels. The house ran like the inside of a watch, every gear turning against every other gear, and Celeste was a stone somebody had dropped into the movement and hadn't decided yet whether to remove. She counted the days by scratching the varnish off the underside of the windowsill with her thumbnail. 1 line a morning, low where nobody looked. On the 9th line, she stopped pretending she was going to be gone by the 10th. They fed her. They walked her, once a day, down the east corridor, to a narrow stone terrace where the pines came right up to the rail and the air smelled like sap and cold, and a man with a holster stood 8 feet off, pretending to watch the tree line. They gave her back a book she asked for, a paperback, spine cracked, nothing with a hard cover, and took her request for a knife to sharpen a pencil, and turned it into a pencil, pre-sharpened, delivered by Mireille, who watched her write 2 lines and then held her hand out for it back. "He says you keep the pencil," Mireille said, "not the knife." "He says." Everything in the house came prefaced with those 2 words. He says the guest walks at 3. He says the window stays. He says the man himself she saw exactly once a day, at dinner, at the far end of a table built for 30, and every one of those dinners was a small war she kept losing on ground she couldn't see. The dinners were the thing. The first one, Han came for her at 7, walked her down the 2 staircases and along the Honeystone Hall, past the ink paintings with their own lights and no faces, and put her in the same chair, in the middle of the long table's width, the whole polished length of it, laid out between her and the head. Dojin was already there. He was always already there, 3/4 turned to the black window, sleeve folded to the forearm, a phone face down by his hand, a bowl in front of him with steam coming off it that would be gone by the time the meal ended, untouched. She learned to read him by the coffee. There was always coffee at his place, in a small, dark cup, and it was always cold. She watched a girl, young, quiet, quick, set a fresh cup down at the start and clear the old one, full, skin forming on the top of it, and by the middle of the meal, the new cup had gone the same way, a thing put in front of him that his hand never reached for. Nobody drinks that much coffee and lets it die, unless the coffee was never the point. The point was staying up. The point was a man who needed a reason to have both hands busy and both eyes open at a table at 8 at night, with a woman he was keeping like a number. "You're not eating," she said, the 3rd dinner, because somebody had to say a true thing in that room. His eyes came off the window. "Neither are you." "I ate. You watched me." She turned her fork over. "You put food in front of yourself every night and you let it go cold. Same as the coffee, same as that." She tipped her chin at the bowl. "You sit at the head of a table you don't use so nobody sees where you actually go." Something moved behind his face and went still. "You've been counting my cups." "I count everything. It's the job." She held his eyes. "Wood tells you where it's going to split if you watch it long enough. People aren't that different." He was quiet a moment, then, flat. "Eat your dinner, Miss Davenport." That was how they ended. He always ended them. She would find the crack, press her thumb into it, feel the whole thing about to give, and he would close a door in his voice, and the meal was over, and Han's hand was on the back of her chair. She tried the arithmetic on him too, because that was the language he'd chosen, and she was not going to lose in a language she refused to learn. The 5th night she came with a number. "You spend money keeping me," she said. "A room, food, a woman to walk trays up 2 flights, men to watch a terrace so I can breathe outside for 20 minutes, cameras, locks you had reversed on a whole wing. That costs. Every day I'm here is a day I cost you and pay you nothing." She let it sit. "So either I'm worth more than I look, or you're bad at your own math. And you strike me as a man who is very, very good at his math." The corner of his mouth did something that on another face would have been the start of a smile. "Go on. Let me work." She leaned in an inch. "I'm the best restorer of stringed instruments in 3 states, and I am rotting in a room reading a paperback. You have money. Men with your money own instruments. Broken ones. Fakes they overpaid for. I could earn real money into your book against the number my brother left. Not 211 million, but not 0. Not a room that only costs you." For 1 second she thought she had him. His eyes went to the middle distance, to the ledger she couldn't see, and he did the sum. She watched him do it. and she felt the fracture open. Then he closed it. No. It's clean money. It's you, at a workbench with a chisel and a courier who knows the address. He set the number down like a stone on her chest. You are worth exactly what you are worth in this house, not 100 feet past that gate. The moment your value has to travel, it isn't value anymore. It's a hole with your shape in it. He turned back to the window. You solved a smaller problem and thought it was mine. Eat. She sat there with her clean solution dying on the table like his coffee. That was the wall. Every path she found, he'd already walked and blocked. Escape was arithmetic to him, a cost, a probability, a line item, and he had priced her out of every version of it before she'd thought to try. She would build the argument all afternoon on the terrace, turning it like a joint she was fitting, and bring it down to dinner clean and tight and true, and he would take it apart in 9 words and go back to the black glass, and the fork stayed cold in her hand. But a man that careful was a man protecting something. You don't build a wall that high around nothing. So she stopped trying to climb out. She started trying to see in. She watched the house instead of the door, and the house, when you watched it, was watching one thing, and it wasn't her. There was a rhythm to the staff, and it bent, every night, around the same hour and the same place. Around 11, if she pressed her ear to her own door long enough, the sounds of the house thinned to almost nothing on the far side, the west side, where the long gallery ran past the top of the main stair. No cart went that way. No voice. The young girl who cleared Dojin's coffee never carried it in that direction. Once she heard 2 of the men change places on some post below, and one of them said a short sentence low, and the other one laughed once and stopped himself, the way you stop yourself in a church, or a hospital, or a room where something is sick. Mireille was the tell. Celeste had spent her life reading grain, and Mireille was a piece of old oak with a flaw running under the surface, and every day, the flaw came a little closer to the face. The woman moved through the house upright and exact, chatelaines keys at her waist, her hands sure on every latch and tray and fold, until her path came anywhere near the mouth of the west corridor, and then her eyes went down, and her step got quick, and her thumb found the knuckle of her other hand and worked it, once, twice, the way a person rubs a spot that used to have a ring. "What's down the west hall?" Celeste asked her, the 7th morning, quiet, while Mireille set the tray. The keys stopped moving. The whole woman went still, the way the house went still at 11. "You eat," Mireille said, not looking up. "It gets cold. You've worked here a long time." Celeste kept her voice soft, the voice for a horse that might bolt. "Longer than the young ones. You've got keys to every door in this house on that ring." She looked at the keys. "How many of them open the west wing?" Mireille's hand closed over the ring, covering it, the way you cover a wound. For 1 second, the tired eyes came up and met Celeste's, and there was something in them that wasn't fear of Dojin, and wasn't the flat obedience of he says. It was older than both, and heavier, and it had been carried a long time. "Some doors," Mireille said, very low, "you thank God you cannot open." Then the keys were quiet again, and her face was smooth again, and she was at the door. She paused there, the way she paused, and this time she almost turned around. Celeste saw the shoulder start to come, saw the knuckle get one more working. "He was a boy once," Mireille said to the doorframe, so quiet it was almost inside her own mouth. "I remember him a boy," and she went, and the lock turned, and Celeste sat with a cooling bowl and a sentence she'd been handed, like a splinter she'd have to work out of her palm for days. "He was a boy once." She turned it over that whole afternoon on the terrace, wind coming cold off the pines, the guard 8 feet away with his hands in his pockets, and his eyes anywhere but on the trees. A boy once. People said that about men who'd become something you needed to explain. Nobody says that. He was a boy once. About a man who's simply hard, They say it about a man who broke, and they say it soft, and they say it looking at their own hands. At dinner that night, she looked at Dojin differently, and he caught it before she'd said a word. "You have a new question," he said. "You've been holding it since the terrace. I can see you holding it." She hadn't known he watched the terrace. She filed it. "You don't sleep." His face didn't change. That was the answer. A man who slept fine would have said, "Of course I sleep," and reached for the coffee he never drank. He did neither. He looked at her across 30 feet of table, with the black window behind him, and the untouched bowl going gray between them, and the dark under his eyes was its own confession, blue-brown and deep, the eyes of a man on the far side of a wall he'd been holding up for years with his own back. "Careful," he said finally. "Just that. It wasn't a trap, it's a fact. Mireille won't say your name near the west stair. Your men laugh once and swallow it. There's a cup of coffee at your elbow every night that's really a clock, and you never once look at the food." She set her fork down, gently, a craftsman laying a tool in its slot. "You keep a whole wing behind reversed locks, and you keep a woman 3 floors up behind a door that only opens from the hall, and you sit at the end of the longest table in the house every night so nobody stands close enough to see how tired you are. I fix broken things for a living. I know what a load-bearing crack looks like when somebody's painted over it." The room was very quiet. Down the hall, the brass clock ticked its slow, flat tick. For a second, 1 second, the man at the head of the table wasn't the snow wolf. He was just tired. It went across his face like weather across the terrace, there and gone. And underneath it, for that single second, was the boy Mireille remembered. Then the door came back into his voice, and it came back harder than she'd heard it, because she'd gotten close enough that closing it cost him something. "You want to know what's down that hall?" He stood. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "You've wanted to know since the night you got here. You think if you count enough cups and read enough faces, you'll earn the answer." He buttoned nothing, straightened nothing. He simply stood, and the whole room seemed to lean toward him. "Here is the answer. There is no answer. There is a rule. You do not go down that hall. Not in daylight, not at night. Not if you hear the house move. Not if you hear a voice you think you recognize." She hadn't mentioned a voice. Her pulse jumped. He saw it jump. "Han," he said, not loudly, and Han was in the doorway before the name finished, the way he was always somewhere just outside the room. "Miss Davenport is finished. I'm not. You are." He was already turning to the window, already gone back to whatever he watched out there in the dark that wasn't the garden. "Take her up." Han's hand found the back of her chair. She stood because standing was hers to choose, and being pulled up was not, and she walked out ahead of him with her spine straight, and at the mouth of the hall she looked left, down the length of the gallery toward the west wing, one long dim throat of a corridor, with a single lamp burning at the far end of it, and every door along it turned the wrong way. The lamp at the end of the west hall was on. Nobody had walked her past a lit lamp in an empty wing at 8 at night in 9 days of watching this house, and she filed that too, low and cold, in the place where she kept the things that would matter later. Han walked her up. The staircase, the second staircase, the honeystone hall, the ink paintings sliding past under their own small lights, faceless mountains, a crane, a pine bent in a wind that wasn't there. He didn't speak until her door. "You keep pushing at that wing," he said, and it wasn't a threat, which was what made her turn and look at him. His face under the gray temples was doing something his face didn't do. The small muscle at the jaw, the fine white scar on his chin, catching the light as it worked. "You keep pushing, and one night you're going to get exactly what you asked for. And I've watched grown men who carry guns for a living find a reason to be on the other side of the house when it happens." He put the key in her lock. "Don't be brave in this house. Brave gets answered here." "Answered how?" He turned the key. The bolt slid. You heard him. The same 3 words. The whole house ran on them. She stood in the doorway of the room that only opened from outside and looked at the man who was afraid of a wing in his own boss's house and asked the only thing left. When you hear it, she said, whatever it is, what does it sound like? For a second, Han Ji-woo, chief of security, a man with a holster under his coat, and gray at his temples, and a scar he'd earned somewhere he'd never say, for 1 second, he wasn't there with her at all. He was somewhere down that hall on some other night, and whatever he heard there was on his face, and it was the same thing that lived in Mirei's eyes and in the swallowed laugh of the guard on the stair. Like nothing you'll want to forget, he said, and you won't be able to. He shut the door. The bolt turned. His boots went back down the hall, steady, a man walking away from a wing he wouldn't walk toward, and Celeste stood in the middle of the cold room with the paperback and the pencil that used to be a knife and the music box that couldn't play, and understood that she had spent 9 days looking for a way out of this house when the thing she needed to understand was buried at the center of it, behind reversed locks, under a lamp somebody kept lit, in a hall where a man who owned $211 million of ruin went every night and came back looking like he'd been holding the roof up with his spine. She crossed to the window, 10 scratches under the sill now, and she added the 10th with her thumbnail, low, where nobody looked. Outside, the pines had gone black against a sky the color of a bruise, and the wind was coming up off the mountain the way it had the night they drove her here, pushing at the glass, finding the painted seams. She sat on the end of the bed and put the box on her knees and did not open it. Somewhere below, a door she couldn't see stayed shut. Somewhere at the end of a lit hall, something waited that made armed men find business on the far side of the house. And she, a stone dropped into a watch, a number with a face, a woman they took the razors away from, sat in the dark and felt the whole careful machine of the place turning around that one dark room, and knew, with the flat, cold certainty she used to feel a fracture that hadn't finished spreading, that the wall Dojin had built wasn't around his money. It was around the boy Mirei remembered. The wind leaned on the window, the lamp at the end of the west hall. She could see it in her mind, burning in that long, empty throat, did not go out. And Celeste, who had run out of ways to argue with arithmetic, stopped trying to leave the house and started, in the dark, to plan how she was going to walk into the one part of it she'd been forbidden to enter. Not tonight. Her thumbnail found the 10th scratch in the sill and pressed it, but soon, on a night the house was looking somewhere else. The clock down the hall ticked its slow, flat tick, and the storm came up the mountain toward them in the dark, and nobody in that house was asleep. The lights went first in the east wing, and Celeste was already sitting up when the dark hit. She had felt the storm all day, felt it in her teeth, in the pressure behind her eyes, in the way the pines outside her window stopped swaying and started thrashing. Now the room dropped to black between one breath and the next. The lamp on the nightstand died mid-glow. The little red eye of the smoke detector blinked out, and the whole house exhaled a low mechanical groan, somewhere deep in its walls, as every fan and vent and cooler quit at once. Silence. Real silence. The first real silence she had heard in this house in 10 nights. She counted 1, 2, 3. On 4, a generator should have caught. In a house like this, cameras in the corners, locks turned the wrong way, a man who priced every exit, a house like this had backup. She had assumed it the way she assumed the floor would hold. She waited for the hum to return, for the red eyes to reopen, for the machine to swallow the quiet again. It didn't come. The dark stayed dark. The rain threw itself against the painted shut window in fistfuls, and under the rain, under the wind clawing its way up the mountain, something else moved through the house. Feet, fast feet, below her, crossing the stone floor of the hall. Not the measured tread of a guard on rotation. This was quick, and it was leaving. A door banged. A voice hissed a word in Korean, sharp, low, the sound a man makes when he wants to run and won't let himself. She stood in the middle of the black room and let her eyes chase the shapes of it. The window was a lighter square of storm gray. The door was a black slab. Her own hands were pale ghosts when she lifted them in front of her face and could just make them out. 10 nights she'd had light. A lamp they never let her switch off, a red eye that never blinked. She'd hated both. Now the dark came down like a lid, and she found she'd have traded a week of terrace pencils to have the little red eye back. Because a house that watched you was a house that also, somehow, watched over the thing in the west. And a house gone blind was a house where the thing in the west got loose. Celeste got off the bed. She crossed to her own door in 3 steps and put her palm flat against the wood. Cold. She turned the handle. Locked, of course, from the outside, the way it locked every night at 7:58. But she could hear better with her hand on it, the way you feel a cello's crack better with your fingers than your eyes. And what she felt through that door was the whole house tilting toward the west. Then the first scream came. It did not sound like a man. That was the thing her mind snagged on before it could snag on anything else. It came from across the house, from the far side of the galleries, from the wing with the one lit lamp and the doors that faced the wrong way. And it did not sound like a grown man of 36 with shoulders that filled a doorframe. It sounded like something being torn out at the root, high at the top, then cracking down into a register so low it went through the floor and into the soles of her feet. Her whole body went still. The scream broke, gathered, and came again. Words in it now. Korean, ragged, the same 3 or 4 syllables over and over. A name maybe, a no maybe. She couldn't tell, and it didn't matter, because the sound wasn't asking anyone for anything. It wasn't a call for help. Help was a thing that lived in the daylight world, and this came from somewhere the daylight had never reached. She thought of every dinner. Every night she'd sat at the wrong end of that 30-foot table and watched a man leave a bowl to go cold and a cup to skin over. Watched him hold his own face flat, with a strength she'd mistaken for cruelty. The flat face was a lid too. She saw it now. Every calm sentence he'd ever set down between them like a closing door. Eat your dinner, Miss Davenport. Every one of them had been laid over this. He walked into rooms carrying this. He priced her exits and confiscated her pencil and ran a $200 million debt through his ledgers, with this waiting for him in the dark like a second job. Nobody sleeps in this house, she'd told him. She'd thought she was being clever. She hadn't known the half. Below her, the fast feet multiplied. 2 men now, 3, moving through the dark hall, and they were moving the wrong way. Away. Toward the front of the house, toward the stairs down, toward anywhere that wasn't the west. She heard a shoulder hit a wall. She heard a man breathe out hard through his nose, that clipped animal exhale of somebody holding terror on a leash. She heard Han's voice. She knew it now, the flat gravel of it. Say one word, and it was not an order. It was permission. Go. He was telling his own men to go. Grown men who carry guns, he'd told her at her door. Find a reason to be on the other side of the house when it happens. Now she understood the tense of it. When it happens. Present. Recurring. This was not the first time. This was a thing this house did. On schedule. The way her oven-warm oil room hummed at 2 in the morning. The storm had only taken the walls down. The screaming had always been there. And then a different sound reached her, and it was almost worse than the screaming. A soft, hurried scrape 3 doors down her own hall, on her own floor. A woman's shoes. Quick. Mireille. The old keys on her belt jingling once, stifled. A hand clamped over them to kill the noise. The governess was moving through the black east wing toward the stairs, and Celeste heard her stop, right at the mouth of the corridor, heard the small held breath of a woman deciding, and then heard her go down, away, fast, taking the keys and the small mercy of another human being with her. Even Mireille, even the one who remembered him a boy. When the dark came and the wing woke up, she remembered him a boy and she ran. The sound cut off. For one breath she thought it was over. Then it started lower and worse. Not a scream anymore. A moan that climbed and folded and climbed again. A sound with no bottom to it. The sound of a body somewhere down that forbidden hall coming apart and being made to live through it awake. Between the swells she could hear him breathing, and the breathing was the part she couldn't stand. Fast, shallow, drowning fast. A man pulling air like the air was running out. Celeste's back found the wall. She hadn't decided to move. Her legs had folded and set her down on the floor in the corner where the bed met the outer wall, knees up, spine pressed to the cold plaster, and her hands had come up over her ears before she knew they'd gone. Under her fingers, her own pulse slammed. Through her fingers, the sound still came. There was no thickness of hand or wall that kept it out. The house carried it. The house was built to carry it. She understood that now too. Understood the long galleries and the high mel-colored ceilings and the stone. Understood why a man would build a fortress with acoustics like a cathedral and then fill it with a sound he could not stand to hear. He wasn't keeping the world out. He was keeping this in. Down the hall, a door somewhere slammed a last time, and then the running feet were gone, and it was just the storm and the rain and the man screaming, and Celeste alone in the dark 3 floors up, with her hands over her ears and the wolf of it going through her anyway. Her jaw was clenched so hard it ached. She had held herself flat for 10 nights, flat at the dinners, flat on the terrace, flat when they took the pencil, flat when the lock turned. She had counted cups and counted days and counted exits and kept the count between herself and the fear like a wall of her own. But you cannot count against a sound like this. Numbers slid off it. It wasn't information. It was the oldest thing there was. One creature hearing another one in agony in the dark, and her body did what a body does. It looked for the thing that meant safe. And the thing her body reached for was a song. It came up out of her without a decision, the way the corner had, the way the hands had. Low, barely voiced, more breath than note, the melody she had known before she'd known words, the one her mother used to hum with her mouth against the crown of Celeste's head when the fevers came, when the wrist broke, when the nights were long and the apartment was cold, and there was no money and no father, and no morning that felt guaranteed. 6 notes down, 4 notes up, a small worn phrase that fit in the mouth like a smooth stone. She wasn't singing to him. She didn't know she was singing to anyone. She was singing the way you press your own hand to a wound, for herself, to keep her own self from flying apart in that corner, while the house screamed around her. Her eyes were shut. Her forehead was on her knees. The tune moved through her chest and out past her teeth, thin as thread. The lullaby had no name she'd ever learned. Her mother hadn't had a name for it either, just hummed it, the way some women hum without knowing they've started, over a stove, over a fever, over a girl with a wrist in a cast crying in a cold apartment, while the older brother paced and swore he'd fix everything. 6 down, 4 up. It had lived in the silver box on the shelf once, before the mechanism seized, back when the little pinned cylinder still turned, and the steel comb still sang it in a thin, bright music you could wind up with a key. 6 years dead now, that box. The song had outlived its machine. The song had moved into Celeste and gone on without it, the way songs do, the way the only things that ever really last do. She got through the phrase once, started it again, and the house took it. She felt it before she understood it. A change in the pressure of the room, the way a hall goes live when the right frequency finds it. The stone under her, the long throat of the galleries, the high ceilings built to carry a scream. They caught the small worn phrase and lifted it and ran it out of her corner and down through the dark toward the west. She heard her own 6 notes come back to her faint and doubled. bent by distance, threading out under the door and along the floor she was not allowed to walk. Her voice snagged. She almost stopped. Then some cold, clear part of her, the part that could set a $200,000 object down gently while 4 men broke her door, that part said keep going, and she didn't fully know why, and she kept going. 6 down, 4 up. The phrase her mother wore into her like a groove. The screaming changed. It didn't stop, not yet, but it faltered. The awful climbing moan hitched, dropped a breath, as if the man 3 galleries away had run into something in the dark that wasn't fear. Celeste's whole body strained toward the change without moving an inch. She held the note. She let it fall. She lifted the next. And the second time the melody reached the far side of the house, the sound over there broke off clean, and in the gap where it had been there was only breathing. Still fast, still ragged, but listening now. She could hear it listening. A man in the dark had stopped screaming to hear where a song was coming from. She kept singing. She was crying, and she hadn't noticed that either. The water running quiet down her face and off her jaw onto her knees. But her voice stayed level, because the voice was the one thing in this house she still owned outright, and she poured it out along that impossible acoustic thread, as steady as she could hold it. 6 notes her mother sang over a broken wrist. 4 notes her mother sang over an empty cupboard. A lullaby carried by a fortress built to trap a man's worst hour, running backward down the one corridor she'd been forbidden, to the one door she'd been told not to open, to whatever lived behind it. Somewhere out in the storm, a branch tore loose and hit the side of the house, and she didn't flinch. The rain kept on. The dark stayed whole. The generators never woke. Down the west hall, the breathing steadied by a fraction. The moan didn't come back. Celeste pressed her spine harder to the wall and sang the phrase into the black, and did not stop, and did not stop, and the house carried every note of it the wrong way down the hall she was never supposed to know. Outside, the storm hunted for the roof. A gust hit the west face of the house, and the old timbers took it with a long shudder, and the window in front of her flexed in its frame and held. She braced for the moon-gray square to go black with another downpour, and kept the phrase going through it, because she had learned in the second minute that the melody didn't need her to be brave. It only needed her not to stop. Brave was a decision. This was older than a decision. This was the body remembering the one thing that had ever made the dark survivable, and giving it away down a corridor to a stranger who needed it more. She lost the count of how many times she sang it. That frightened her later, when she could be frightened about small things again. That she, who counted everything, who counted his cups and her days and the guards on the terrace, had let go of the number. But in the dark there was no number. There was the phrase and the breath at the far end of it, and the thin, bright line strung between them across the whole width of the house, and she was afraid that if she let the line go slack, the screaming would come back and take the whole night down into it. So she held the line. Her voice went hoarse. She dropped it lower, easier, the way her mother did in the last hour before sleep finally won, when the notes were more shape than sound. The storm outside began, very slowly, to lose its worst edge. The wind stepped down from a howl to a long, steady push, the rain from fists to a hiss. And under the wind and the rain, from the far side of the galleries, past the forbidden door, the breathing kept getting slower. She noticed the exact moment she stopped being able to hear it, and the noticing sent a cold thread up her back. Because the sound going quiet did not feel like the sound going away. It felt like the sound turning toward her, like something in the west wing that had spent every dark hour of every night thrashing at the end of its chain, had lifted its head in the black, gone still, and fixed on the one small human voice that had ever reached it there. Celeste's fingers, still half pressed to her own ears, went cold at the tips. She had come into this house counting exits. She had spent 10 days learning the shape of her cage and telling herself that the day she understood it was the day she'd find the seam. She had lain on that bed 2 nights ago and decided, with the clean, flat certainty she trusted more than hope, that she would walk the West Hall on a night when the house was looking the wrong way. The house was looking the wrong way now. Every guard was gone to the far side. Every camera was a dead black eye. Every lock in the place had gone stupid the second the power died. This was the night. This was, down to the storm and the dark and the empty hall, exactly the night she had asked the house to give her. And she understood, sitting in the corner with a lullaby wearing her voice down to thread, that she was not going to move. Not because she was afraid of the hall. She had stopped being afraid of the hall somewhere in the second phrase. She wasn't going to move because she finally knew what was at the end of it, and knowing had changed the shape of the whole cage around her. The screaming had a source. The source had heard her. And a thing that had heard you in the dark, that had gone quiet only for you, did not need locks to hold you anymore. The realization arrived without a single word attached to it, the way the melody had, the way the corner had. She had walked into this place as collateral, a line in a book, a body they'd priced, a hole in the ledger with her shape in it. She had spent 10 nights believing the walls were the trap. The walls were nothing. The walls were the least of it. The trap was the sound she'd just answered, and she had answered it with her own mouth, in her own mother's voice, and there was no taking it back. She kept singing anyway, softer now, because stopping felt more dangerous than going on, and because this was the part she would not let herself look at straight, not yet, because the man at the far end had stopped screaming, and some worn, foolish, bone-deep thing in her did not want to be the reason it started again. The storm eased another notch. The rain settled into a long gray wash against the glass. The house held its breath, and down the West Hall, in the dark she'd been forbidden, behind the door she'd been warned about at daylight and at night, and if she heard the house move, and if she heard a voice she thought she knew, the breathing that she could no longer hear at all had stopped fighting the air. Celeste sat in the corner with her spine to the cold wall, and her knees to her chest, and her mother's 6 notes falling out of her, one more time, thinner than the rain, and waited for a morning she was no longer sure would find her the same. The wind pushed once more up the mountain, hard, and fell away. Somewhere far across the black house, a floorboard took a slow, deliberate weight, the first sound in that whole wing that was not a scream and was not the storm. And then, closer than the galleries, closer than the stairs, closer than anything 3 floors up had any right to be, a key found a lock in the dark and began, very quietly, to turn. The lock gave up on the 3rd turn. Celeste heard the bolt slide, heard the small metal surrender of it, and she stopped singing mid-note. The note hung there, then it was gone, and there was only her own breathing, and the door swinging inward on the dark. She stayed in the corner, knees to her chest, spine against the outer wall, the place where the storm had pushed at her back all night. She could not see him. The house was still blind, every red eye dead, every cooler silent, but she could hear him. Bare feet on the floorboards, slow, uneven, like a man walking on a deck that would not hold still. He came 2 steps into the room and stopped. Where did it come from? Not loud. That was the thing that put the hair up on her arms. After the sounds she had heard through the floor for the last hour, after the gutting and the drowning and the Korean word thrown over and over into the black, his voice came out flat, scraped clean. A man who had used up everything he had to scream with and had nothing left but the question. Celeste did not answer. Her throat had gone to rope. She pressed her hand over the pendant under her shirt without deciding to. The song. He took another step. She heard his breath catch on it, the way a body catches when it has been sobbing and is trying to stop. Where did it come from? Me. One word. It scraped on the way out. Then something dropped. She felt it more than saw it. The shift of weight, heavy. a big body going down all at once, and then his knees hit the boards 2 feet in front of her, and the whole floor took the shock of it. Seo Dojin, the snow wolf, on his knees in the dark in a locked room 3 floors up, and Celeste had not moved an inch, and somehow he had found exactly where she was, like the song had left a thread, and he had followed it hand over hand to the corner. Say it again. Say what? The song. His breathing was ragged, close now, close enough that she could smell him, sweat and salt, and under it something metallic, the smell of a body that had been fighting itself all night. No cologne, no cedar, nothing borrowed, just the man. Sing it again. She should have said no. Later, in the gray, she would turn it over and know that no was the answer that kept a wall up. But her mother's melody was still sitting in her chest where the fear had put it, 6 notes down and 4 back up, and her body had been holding it as a shield for an hour, and when he asked, the shield came out of her before her pride could grab it back. She sang it, low, half voice, cracked at the edges. And the man in front of her broke all the way open. She heard it happen. A sound came up out of Dojin that had nothing to do with the boss at the head of the 30-seat table, nothing to do with $211 million, nothing to do with locks turned the wrong way. It was the sound a person makes when a hand they have not felt in years touches the back of their neck. He folded. She heard his forehead come down, heard it meet the boards, heard the long, shaking breath drag out of him and break in the middle. Celeste kept singing. She did not know what else to do with her hands, so she kept them on her knees, and she kept the melody going, because the second she stopped, the shaking in the dark got worse. "You don't understand," he said into the floor. The Korean bled into it. 1 word. Then he pulled himself back to English, like a man pulling a coat back onto a wound. "You cannot understand what you just did. Then get up." Her voice found a floor under it. "Get up and tell me." He didn't get up, but the shaking eased. She could hear his breath find a rhythm. 4 counts, hold, 4 counts. Her own count, the one she used before she walked into rooms that could hurt her, and it landed on her strange to hear it coming from him, like they had been handed the same broken tool by the same absent parent. "How long?" he said. "How long what? Have you had it?" The song. "Since before I could talk." She let the melody trail off. The dark leaned in when she stopped, so she picked it back up, humming now, just the shape of it. "My mother. It lived in a music box before the box died. 6 years ago," she heard him go very still. "You saw the box. At your table. You told me it was a piece of silver." The stillness stretched. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, careful, the exact care she had heard once before, the night he'd said the words for West Hall. Like each one was a stair that might not be there. "That box," a breath. "That box plays this. It used to." Something moved in the dark, his hand. She felt it come up and hover, not touching her, a foot off, the way a person holds a hand near a flame they are not sure is real. Then it dropped. He did not touch her. She would remember that too. A man who owned every door in the house, on his knees in the one room he had locked, and he kept his hand to himself like touching her would put the song out. "Keep singing," he said, "until it's light." No. The word landed between them. She felt his head come up off the floor. "I'll sing tonight," she said, "because you're on my floor, and I can't get past you, and I'm not going to sit here and listen to you come apart. But I'm not a lamp, Mr. Seo. You don't flip me on when the dark gets bad." Her hand tightened on the pendant. "You want the song? You tell me what it's buying." For a long moment he said nothing. Outside, the storm had finally given up the mountain. The wind was a long push now, the rain a hiss, and somewhere below a floorboard settled as the house cooled. "It's buying you the only night I sleep," he said. Then he stood. She heard the effort of it, both knees, A hand braced on the wall by her head, the big body hauling itself upright, like it weighed more going up than it had coming down. He crossed to the bed. She heard him sit on the edge of it, her bed, the covers still thrown back from where she'd left them, and she heard him lie down, slow, on his back, one arm coming up over his eyes, the way men do when the light is too much, except there was no light. "Sing," he said, "not an order this time, lower than that, please." Celeste stayed in her corner. She looked at the shape of him on her bed, a darker dark, and she thought about the terrace, and the pencil they took back, and the knife they never gave her, and the window painted shut, and the 9 mornings she had scratched into the sill, and she understood, cold, clean, the way wood tells you where it will split, that the cage had never been the walls. She sang, until his breathing changed. It took a long time, longer than she thought a body could hold out. But somewhere in the 2nd hour, when the black in the window had gone to the color of a bruise going old, the ragged edge came off his breath, and it slowed and slowed, and then it went deep, and even in a way she had not once heard from him at any dinner, the breath of a man all the way under, gone, not guarding anything. Seo Dojin was asleep, in her bed, and she was the reason. She stopped singing, he didn't stir. She let the quiet sit, and it held, the sleep held, and in the gray, coming up over the pines, Celeste finally saw him without the table between them, without the collar hiding the wolf, without the flat face he wore like a lid. Just a man, one arm over his eyes, hair damp at the temple, chest rising slow. He looked younger asleep. He looked like someone Mireille might remember as a boy. She did not sleep. She sat in the corner and watched the light come, and she counted his breaths, because counting was the job, and every breath was a stone laid on top of her, because she knew what the light was going to bring. He would wake. He would remember she had seen this, and a man like Dojin did not leave a witness standing next to the one thing that could put him on his knees. The light came full at last, thin and cold on the floorboards. He woke without a sound. 1 second the deep breath, the next his arm came off his eyes and he was awake all the way, no drift, the awake of a man who had trained the drift out of himself years ago. He looked at the ceiling, then he sat up on the edge of her bed and put his bare feet on the floor and looked at her in the corner, and for a moment neither of them said a thing, and the whole night sat in the room with them. "You watched me," he said. Somebody had to. She got up. Her legs had gone dead under her, and she came up out of the corner on them anyway, one hand on the wall, and she made herself stand level with him. "You slept." He stood. In the daylight, he was the boss again, the size of him filling the small room, the wolf climbing the side of his neck above the open collar, the shirt gone gray at the back with dried sweat. But his eyes had a rawness the flat face couldn't cover, and he knew she could see it, and that was the thing he could not forgive. He went to the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame. "You will not speak of this," he said. "Not to Mireille, not to Han, not to the girl who brings the tray. Who would believe me?" That almost got something out of him. Almost. The corner of his mouth moved, and then it didn't. He looked back at her once, the way you look at a thing you have decided you can't afford to lose and can't stand to owe, and then he was gone, and the door swung shut, and, she waited for it, the bolt did not turn. For the first time in 10 nights, the lock did not turn. She stood there staring at the door, unlocked, and she understood that too, and it was worse than the bolt. He hadn't locked her in, because a locked door was a door she might get through. He had something better now. He had the song. The house woke up around her by degrees. The power came back mid-morning. The red eye of the detector blinked alive. The coolers hummed up. The lamp she hadn't turned off flared on, and she crossed and shut it off herself. The tray came late. Mireille set it inside the door without a word, and when she straightened, the governess looked at Celeste for a full second longer than she ever had. her eyes moving over her face like she was reading a page she'd read before and hoped never to read again. Her thumb went to the bare knuckle on her other hand. She left. She did not lock the door. By noon, the house had gone wrong in a way Celeste could feel through the floor. There were more feet than usual, moving fast, moving toward the front. Voices in the entrance hall, low, then one not low. Han, the words coming up hard through the boards. Coreano, and then a clipped run of English she caught in pieces. You were told, every one of you. A pause. He does not want to see your faces by dark. Celeste went to her door and opened it. It opened, still strange under her hand, and stepped into the east corridor for the first time without a hand on her arm. No one stopped her. No one was there to. She went as far as the mouth of the corridor, to the head of the gallery where she could see down into the entrance hall through the rail, and she looked at what a bad night bought in this house. They were lined up in the hall, the night guards. 6 of them, 7, the men who stood in the dark corners and rode the black glass cars and carried what they carried under their coats. They stood with their hands folded in front of them and their eyes on the mel-colored stone, and Han moved down the line collecting things. Earpieces, fobs, and keys, a ring from each of them, dropped one by one into a canvas sack Han held open, the brass going in with a sound like coins, until the sack sagged with the weight of every lock in the house. Dojin stood at the foot of the main stair, showered now, in a clean shirt, the collar up, the wolf hidden, the flat face bolted back on. He watched the men give up their keys and he said nothing to any of them. He didn't have to. Han said it for him, walking the line, and the one thing Celeste heard clean, the thing Han said to the last man in the row, was this. You ran. He remembers who ran. The men filed out. The great door opened on the gray noon and the pines, and it closed behind the last of them, and the sack of keys sat on the stone floor of the hall like a dead animal. Dojin bent and picked it up himself. He did not hand it to Han. He held the whole ringing weight of it in one fist, every key to every lock in the fortress, and he turned and looked up. Straight up, over the rail, to the head of the gallery, to her, like he had known she was there the whole time. Celeste did not step back. She held the rail and she held his eyes, and the sack of keys hung between them from his fist. She understood the accounting now, all of it, laid out clean. He had fired the men who ran, because a man who runs is a man who has seen the thing they must not see. He had taken the keys because keys were something to be handed off, to be copied, to be dropped and found, and he had left her door unlocked because he did not need a bolt anymore. He needed her voice, and a voice you cannot lock out, a voice you have to keep close. You, Dojin said, up the stairwell, the word carrying flat and certain across the whole cold height of the hall. Downstairs, you eat at my table now, the small one is finished. He turned and walked toward the west, the sack of keys swinging from his fist, and Han fell in behind him, and Mireille stood at the edge of the hall with her hands folded and her eyes down, and not one of them looked back at the woman at the rail. Celeste stood there a long time after he was gone. Below her the hall was empty, the tall clock ticking its slow, flat tick, the door shut on the pines, the whole fortress hers to walk now, every corridor open, every lock in a sack in the west wing, no guard within reach, the freest she had been since a black glass car had carried her north out of her own life. She had never in her life been less able to leave. She thought of the terms she'd won in her workshop, the last night she'd owned anything, the clasp, the courier, the case, the cello going home Friday to a man who'd never know how close it came to being the last thing she'd controlled. She thought of the 9 scratches under the sill and the 10th she'd cut before the storm, and she knew there would be no 11th, because you don't count the days in a place you've stopped trying to leave. Her hand found the pendant under her shirt, the treble clef. Her mother's, 6 notes down and 4 back up, the shape of it worn smooth against her thumb. She'd sung the wolf to sleep, and in the morning he'd given her the run of the house and taken away the one thing that had ever made a run of the house mean anything. Down the west hall, somewhere past the gallery, a door she still had not seen opened and closed, and the sack of keys stopped ringing. Celeste turned from the rail and went back to her room to wait for dark, because dark was hers now, and so was the man who could not get through it without her. Dark came the way she'd learned it, came in that house, not all at once, but in layers, the pines going from green to iron to nothing, the last gold window on the ground floor snuffing itself out. Celeste sat on the edge of her bed with the silver box in her lap and did not open it. She counted her own breathing instead. 4 in, hold, 4 out, and somewhere below her, past the gallery, past the long hall of paintings with no faces, a door she had never crossed opened, and this time it did not close. She heard the weight cross the floor before she heard the man. Slow, deliberate, bare feet on stone, the way they'd sounded the night of the blackout. Except the house had power now, and every step was a choice he was making out loud. He was not sneaking. He wanted her to hear him coming. He came up the east stairs and down her corridor and stopped outside the door that no longer locked, and for a moment neither of them moved on either side of the wood. Then he opened it. Do-jin stood in the doorframe with the lamp behind him, clean shirt, collar up, the wolf hidden the way he kept it hidden in daylight. But his hands were wrong. They hung open at his sides, empty, and one of them held the silver ring of keys, the whole house in his fist, every bolt and every gate, and he was carrying it up to the one room he'd already stopped locking. "You didn't come down," he said. "You were told to eat at my table." I ate. She kept the box still on her knees, in my room, like every night before you decided the small table was finished. He came in. He set the ring of keys on her dresser, careful, like a man setting down something that might go off, and the metal made one flat note against the wood and went quiet. He looked at the box in her lap. He looked at it the way he'd looked at it the first night at the long table, the flicker behind the face, except now the flicker didn't hide. "That box," he said. "It played the song. You already know it did." She didn't lift her eyes to him. "You said it yourself, that night." "I said what it does. I never said what it is." He pulled the chair from the wall, the one chair, and he turned it, and he sat, elbows on his knees, close now, close enough that she could smell him. No cedar, no cologne, just the salt of a man who hadn't slept right in years. "You want to know why you're not a line in a book? Why I didn't put you back through the gate the way arithmetic says I should? You asked me the first night. You've been asking with your eyes every night since. I stopped asking. You never stop asking. It's the job." He almost smiled. It didn't reach anything. Wood tells you where it splits. Her thumb moved to the clasp of the box and stopped there. He was quiet for a long moment. The house was quiet with him. Somewhere below, a shutter she'd never seen ticked against its frame, and the sound made his shoulders draw up half an inch, the way she'd watched Mireille's shoulders draw up at the mouth of the West Hall, the way she'd watched grown men with guns find reasons to be on the other side of the house. She had spent 10 days learning to read the small tells of everyone in this place. She had never once, until now, watched Do-jin flinch at a sound. "There was a woman," he said. Celeste went still. "Not my mother." He said it fast, like he had to get past the word before it caught on something. "My mother sold what she had to sell, and I was part of what she had. I was 6. There was a house, not this one, a worse one, and there was a woman who cooked in it. Servant's woman. Nobody. And at night, when the men who owned the house were finished with the rooms, she'd find me where I'd put myself, in the gap between the stove and the wall, and she'd sing." His jaw worked. 6 notes down, 4 up. The lamp buzzed. Neither of them touched it. "I didn't know the words then. I don't know them now. It wasn't Korean. It was hers, from wherever she came from before somebody sold her too. His hands opened and closed. She was the only thing in that house that touched me and didn't want anything back. 2 years. She kept me alive with rice she stole and a song she owned nothing else in the world but. And then one night, the men found her in the gap with me, and they decided she was teaching me to be soft, and softness is expensive in that trade. He turned the ring of keys once in his hand and set it down on his own knee, absent, a man who needed something to do with his fingers. She had watched him do the same thing with a coffee cup every night at the long table. The cold coffee that was only ever a clock, an excuse to keep the hands moving so the rest of him could stay in the chair. She understood it now. He'd been holding on to the edge of the world one cold cup at a time, night after night, so he wouldn't fall back into that gap. "You want to know the part that finishes it," he said. It was not a question. "You count everything. You already counted it." Celeste did not say anything. She had learned, in that house, that the worst way to lose a thing was to reach for it too soon. They did it in front of me so I'd learn the lesson clean. His hand rose, without him seeming to send it, to the place below his right collarbone. One of them held me against him so I'd watch. I got a knife in me for turning my face away. Here, I kept the mark. His fingers pressed the shirt over the scar and held it there like he was keeping something in. She sang until she couldn't, and then there was no more song in the world, anywhere, for 30 years. Dojin. No medicine finds it. He talked over his own name in her mouth. You understand? I have paid men in 3 countries. I have swallowed everything a doctor will sell and a few things they won't. I do not sleep, because when the lights go out, I am 6 years old in the gap, and the men are coming, and there is no one singing. That is what lives in the West Wing. Not a person. A room I go to so the house doesn't hear me be that boy. His eyes came up to hers, and for 1 second there was nothing cold in them at all, and then the power died, and a woman 3 floors up sang 6 notes down and 4 up in the dark, and I was not 6 anymore. For the first time in 30 years, someone was singing. The box was warm now under her hands from the heat of her own body. She thought of her mother's face in the workshop photo, laughing, and of 6 years of a machine that would not play, and of a brother who left the lid open so these people would find her, and she understood, with the cold clarity that had never once failed her, exactly what she was worth in this house, and exactly why. "So I'm not collateral," she said. Her voice came out level. "I'm medicine. You're the only thing that works." He said it the way a man reads a number he's checked 100 times and hates every time. "You think I haven't tried to make it be something else? A recording. I had them record you through the door that first night, before the power came back. Do you know what a recording of that song does to me?" He waited, and she didn't answer, and he told her. "Nothing. It has to be a person. It has to be someone who is choosing, in the dark, to keep me here. That's the part no medicine has. That's the part your mother had. That's the part you did without being told. That's worse." She stood. The box she set down on the bed, gently, the way she set down a 200-year-old instrument. Her hands had gone steady the moment the truth was on the table, the same steadiness that came into them when a repair was finally difficult enough to matter. "You hear how that's worse? You built a whole prison to hold $211 million, and it turns out the money was never what you were guarding. The money bought the walls," he said. "You're what's inside them. The money bought a girl named Davenport off a spreadsheet." She shook her head, slow. "You didn't know I could sing. Marcus didn't sell you a singer. He sold you a body to sit at a table, so the number on the page had somebody attached. Everything after that, the song, the sleep, the reason you can't put me through the gate, that's not a debt. That's an accident you're calling a debt, because a debt is a thing you know how to hold. Do you hear that it's worse? A cage I can maybe reason my way out of, but you're telling me I'm the reason you close your eyes. There's no reasoning out of a man's sleep. She turned to face him full on for the first time. You'll never open that gate. Not because I cost too much to move, because I'm the only knight you get. He was silent. She had beaten his logic, and they both heard it land. In 10 days of dinners, she had never once won an argument with him. Every road she found, he'd already priced and closed. This one he had no wall for, because there was no wall a man could build around the thing she'd just named. Sing it now, he said. Quiet, not a boss's voice. Worse than a boss's voice. I've had one night in 30 years, and it was 3 floors away through a locked door. I want it closer. He looked at the bed, at the box, at her. You sleep in here, so I have to send Han when I need you. That ends. You sleep in my room, where I can hear you before the dark gets to me. And there it was, the thing the whole house had been bending toward, said out loud at last, in a lamplit room 3 floors up. No. The word landed flat between them. No, she said again, and she felt the old professional steel come up her spine, the same steel that had put a $200,000 cello behind her body while 4 men broke down her door. I am not a lullaby you keep on a shelf. I am not a music box you carry to the room where you fall apart. My mother sang me those notes because she loved me, not because I quieted her down. You want to turn the last thing she gave me into a switch you flip when you can't sleep. No. You think I want it small, he said. You think I want a switch. I have never once in 30 years wanted anything as much as I do not want to need this. Then let me go. Ask me to cut off my own hand while you're at it. His voice didn't rise. It went lower, which was worse. You keep saying no like it's a door. It isn't a door in this house. You learned that. Han told you, and you didn't believe him. And then you heard me at 3 in the morning, and now you believe him. Brave gets answered here. Something moved across his face. She'd have called it a wound on anyone else. He stood. He was enormous in the small room, and for a breath she thought she had finally found the wall he wouldn't let her past. The one that answered brave the way Han had warned her it got answered in that house. Instead, he laughed, low, almost gentle, the most frightening sound she'd heard from him. You think you won that, he said. I said no. You heard me say it. I heard you. He picked the ring of keys off the dresser. He turned it once in the lamplight so every key caught, and then he crossed to the door and, she watched him do it. He hung the whole ring on the inside hook of her own room, the keys to every lock in the house, and left them there. There, the gate's yours, the doors are yours. Walk out, tonight. Take the box, take the coat, take the car in the South Bay. Han won't stop you. No one will stop you. I'll tell them myself. He stepped back from the door and left the whole black night of it open. Go. She looked at the keys. She looked at the open door and the dark hall past it, and, somewhere down there, the gate that slid without a sound. She thought of the workshop, the cello of the collector waiting in its cradle, the manila folder with the address, the terms she'd won on her way out the door, the clasp, the courier, the climate case, the last things she'd ever controlled. She thought about the courier who by now had come and gone, the instrument delivered to a man in the South who would never know how it left her hands. She had negotiated her exit from that room. There was no term to negotiate here. The door was already open and it changed nothing. She did not move. You can't, he said, and there was no triumph in it, only a terrible kind of recognition, one drowning person naming another. Because you know what happens in the West Wing, at 3 in the morning now. You've heard it, and you're the one who sang it quiet. You walk out that gate, and some night the power dies, and I go back to being 6 in the gap, and there's no one, and you'll be 100 miles away in a bed, knowing the exact notes that would have stopped it. He came close again, and this time his hand did rise to her face, the backs of 2 fingers along her jaw, and he did not grip, and he did not pull. I made you my medicine, but you sang first. Nobody made you do that. That's yours. Her own hand had come up to the pendant under her blouse, without her telling it to. The treble clef, 6 years hidden against her skin, the twin of the dead song in the box. She felt it through the muted plum knit, and she understood that she had been carrying the same music he'd been dying without, all along, in silver over her heart. Down the hall, at the mouth of the corridor, a shape moved and stopped. Mireille, come up the east stairs with a shawl over her nightclothes, keys silenced in her fist out of 30 years of habit. She looked at the open door, at the ring of keys on the inside hook, at the two of them standing close in the lamplight. Her thumb found the bare knuckle where a ring used to be, and rubbed it once. She had waited a long time to see whether the boy she remembered would ever be led out of the gap by anything but the dark. She did not come closer. She lowered her head 1/2 inch, the way she had the first night in the hall, and she went back down the stairs and left them to it. "This isn't sleep you're asking for," she said, and her voice was not steel anymore. "It's a leash that runs both ways." "Yes," he said, "that's the only kind that holds." The lamp buzzed. Outside, the wind came up the mountain, the way it had the night they'd brought her, and far below, in the belly of the house, she heard the long breath of the storm's front edge reaching the glass. He heard it too. She watched him hear it, watched the boy come up behind the man's eyes at the first far sound of weather, the old animal fear that the lights were about to die and take him with them. He did not ask again. He was past asking. He simply reached out in the dark that was already gathering and took her wrist. The same wrist she'd broken at 9, the one her brother once carried her to a hospital to save, the one that held the last thing her mother ever gave her, and he drew her, slow, toward the open door and the hall and the west wing where no medicine had ever found him, one heartbeat, before the storm reached the house and the power went. The lamp died. The whole house went black and silent, cameras blind, bolts useless, the gate standing open behind her, with every key in the world hanging on her own door, where she had left them, untouched. And in the dark she began, without deciding to, 6 notes down and 4 up, and felt his grip on her wrist go from a chain to a hand, felt the terror leave the huge body walking beside her, felt him become, for the length of a lullaby, something that could be led. The debt her brother made had a shape now. It wasn't $211 million. It was this. 2 people in a black corridor, each the only thing keeping the other one whole, and neither one able to leave the room. She thought, one last cold, clear time, of her brother, 11 days of a phone going to voicemail, a music box left open on a shelf so these men would find it, and through it, find her. A cologne of cedar she'd bought him 3 Christmases in a row, still hanging in the air of a workshop 100 miles south. Marcus had run to save Marcus and handed her the bill, and the bill had turned, somewhere in the dark of this house, into a thing he never could have priced. Not a captive, not a corpse, but the one voice in the world that could reach a man where no money ever had. He would never sing. Out there beyond the wall he was the snow wolf, the name men said with the lights on, the hand that closed on cities, the boss no one living had ever seen afraid. Out there nobody touched him and nothing could. In here he only slept if she sang. She sang. The storm took the notes and carried them down the throat of the house the way it was built to, into the west wing, into the gap between the stove and the wall 30 years gone, and Seo Do-jin closed his eyes in the dark and let a black woman he owned lead him by the wrist toward the only sleep on earth that would have him, and Celeste Davenport walked forward into the cage that had never once been the walls, singing her dead mother's song to keep a monster human, knowing there was no note in it that could ever set her free, and no silence she could stand to leave him in. The gate stayed open all night. Neither of them ever walked through it. If this story moved you, stop for a moment and reflect. Tell me, K-Fam, Have you ever paid for a debt that was never yours to carry, handed to you by someone you loved? Have you ever been the only thing keeping another person's mind from breaking, and mistaken that need for love? And when the door finally locked, would you have kept singing? Mark my words, K-Fam. And if you believe in stories about betrayal, obsession, and belonging, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a part of our community and help the channel.